to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch by interviewing authors, discussing their books, learning about the writing process, and even, on occasion, chatting live with a panel of authors to discuss topics relevant to both readers and writers. My guest today on Online for Authors is Emily Winslow, author of the book Time to Write. Emily Winslow lives in Cambridge, England, and in addition to Time to Write, is the author of a Cambridge-set series of crime novels and the memoir Jane Doe January. Her books have been published by Random House, HarperCollins, Allison Busby, and Shanghai Translation Publishing House. Not only is Emily an author, but she trained as an actor, earned a master's degree in museum studies, and is the course director for Cambridge's master degree program in crime and thriller writing.
Welcome today to Online for Authors. Today we have Emily Winslow, who is author of Time to Write and several other books. And we are going to talk today about the craft of writing. Welcome, Emily.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you. So, of course, I read your book. That's, like, why wouldn't I read your book, right? So I want you to tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself, your writing life, and kind of what led you to write Time to Write.
Thank you. So I've written a series of novels, crime novels, set here in Cambridge. I've written a memoir, and those experiences were so deeply, deeply important to me. And I think when you express yourself, when you express your view of the world, which is what we do when we're writing fiction, or when you tell something personal about yourself and you share it and you articulate it even just for yourself, it just it means so much to me as a person, which is why I love to teach. I love to encourage people and help them find their voices, find what they want to say, let them know they are allowed to say what they want to say, help them figure out how they can communicate it most vividly and clearly. Clarity is a really big hobby horse of mine, because a lot of times we perceive things because of what we're bringing to it. And when you write for a wide audience, you need to find a way to communicate to somebody who doesn't think like you do.
Exactly.
So I love teaching, and so Time to Write is the encapsulation of everything I've taught for the past 7 years since I started teaching at Cambridge University. And I just really wanted to, I ended up being asked to teach all these different topics. And I just sort of hit this point with all the lectures where I said, this is it. This is everything I want to say. I want to catch it in a book. So
Awesome.
that's why I wrote it.
Fantastic. So I loved your idea with clarity. That was one of the things that as I was reading, I too am an author, and I've now been through the editing process with an editor 3 different times. Yep. And the times that she has said to me, this is not clear. And my thought is it's not, because it's perfectly clear to me. Those characters, they live in my head, and I know everything about them. I know what they would choose for breakfast at any given restaurant, right? And the fact that it isn't clear, it always shocks me. And then I go back and I try to read it again, and it's like, oh, well, actually, I don't guess I did tell you the things that were sitting in my head, did I?
Yes.
And so that idea of clarity is very important. How do you help authors, soon to be authors, already authors, understand that concept of what you mean by clarity?
Oh, how? I mean, you're right, because sometimes it's very natural to feel resistant when somebody says, I couldn't figure out how old these characters were. And especially when sometimes you'll be in a workshop where there'll be like 6 students, and half of them will say, well, I knew they were teenagers. And the other half will say, well, I thought they were middle-aged. And it's very easy to for the author to get into the feeling of thinking, oh, well, the people who knew they were teenagers were right. And the people who thought they were middle-aged, they just weren't paying attention enough. They were wrong. And I'm not saying that to mock that feeling. That's a natural feeling. I feel that when somebody doesn't understand what I wrote. That's my first reaction. It's normal. But then, yeah, it's take a deep breath and say, well, or do you just want to write this for just these three people? Or do you want to write it for all kinds of people? Because we're not bad people because we misunderstood that. It's just we're coming with a different foundation. And I think this, as with all things, gentleness and encouragement, and the fact that we are all on the same side, we all want each other's stories to be clear.
Right.
Right. And just making it a safe place for people to make these discoveries and realize, oh, okay, yeah, I do want to make that clear.
Right. I know that I've been reading books before where I have had an idea about a character that I recognize at about 2/3 of the way through the book, I'm wrong.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
And then you have to kind of go back and readjust everything. And it's hard because you've already made this character very real in your head, and you've got this character as maybe like a white 17-year-old, and you find out later that she's, like a black 40-year-old, and you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, you almost have to start over again.
You do. You have to kind of then go back and think of all of the things that you've hung on this character and take them off and hang them somewhere else. And it's very hard. So I like that idea of making sure that it's very clear up front, unless that was the purpose of the book.
Of course, deliberate unclarity is a good thing.
Right.
But that's when you're misdirecting to something specific, like they've tricked you into thinking it was a 40-year-old. But if it's just that they didn't tell you, somebody's picturing 40 and somebody else is picturing 60 and somebody else thinks they're 10, then that's not going to work. But if it's deliberate and controlled experience, then
and so even then it's clarity. It's just that you purposefully misdirected, so it was intentional. So it's more about the intent, and so it's really good. You have a chapter in there kind of later, but we'll jump to there right now about editing. And the editing process for me, my very first book, when it was edited, she's a great editor. She was so kind and gentle. And nonetheless, I went to bed afterward and I slept for 12 hours and felt like my book was horrible. And it felt like being back in grade school with all the red notes. Do you know what I'm saying? And I was sure that my book was crap, and it had nothing to do with what she said. It was just, in my mind, my book was so perfect that any kind of quote unquote criticism felt, it was horrible. And so I sat with it.
Yep.
And after a couple of days, I was able to look at one of the pieces and say, well, that actually makes sense. And then the next piece was like, and that one actually makes some sense.
Yep.
And the next one was, well, I can see where she's coming from. So that idea.
That's a beautiful moment.
Yeah. And it's interesting so I just finished my third one. It'll be coming out. And I was actually looking forward to the editing process because
that's a great feeling.
Yeah, the last two times she's been so wonderfully helpful, right? And helped me take my book that was good and make it so much better by just some suggestions. And it's not like she says, Terry, write this.
Yeah.
It's just, I felt like we were wandering around aimlessly for a while, and I needed a little more clarity of where the story was going. Okay, because I knew where the story was going, so it didn't feel like wandering to me, right? Or I would love to hear more about that character.
Yeah.
You would? I would have never, those kinds of things. And to me, that is the most valuable. How can we help authors understand how valuable things like the editing process or criticism or going into like a group where we're going to do critiques and things like that? How can we help an author go into that without that feeling like my book is already perfect and I don't need your help?
Yeah. So I always make sure that there's a master's program that I'm now course director of, and I used to teach on under a different wonderful course director. And I always make sure that my how to give critique class happens in the first week and ideally the first day, really. Because it's so important, because here you have these incredibly talented, ambitious people ready to work, and they're going to be thrown into, giving feedback to each other. And it can just be so scary because you don't want to say anything hurtful or say anything that everybody might disagree with.
Exactly.
But also it's not healthy to go in with the attitude of thinking, oh, I'd better, criticize this person really harshly to show that I
know what I'm doing. Right. Right.
Yeah. Which is, and again, I am not saying that to mock anybody who feels that. It's very natural. I sometimes feel that as a teacher when a student hands in something that's just absolutely marvelous. And all I can say is, well, dang, that was fantastic.
That was good. Great. Yeah.
And I have in the past, no longer, but in the past I've thought, oh no, I'd better find something to comment on. But no, you don't need to. So there are a few things that I focus on there. One is that criticism is not the only thing you can say.
Okay.
Praise is so important. And when people nod and say, yeah, it's important so that it makes the author comfortable enough to hear the criticism. And I'm like, no.
It's more than that.
It's actually important on its own. If all you do is criticize somebody, that's like sending them to the grocery store with a shopping list that says no pickles, absolutely no cake mix, and under no circumstances do I want a turkey. And that's the list. That's not going to help somebody. No. It's not going to help somebody. Right. You have to help people identify what they naturally do well and why it's helpful and what it accomplishes. So I think if all you do is praise somebody, so long as you praise them specifically, you're giving them an incredible gift. So I encourage that, first of all. We want lots of specific praise.
And you had said too in your book that it's really good when you're doing specific to actually like point to a phrase. Like when you said here, when you wrote this here, it evoked this feeling in me. Or I loved the way when your character said XYZ, that this is, So
because
I
when they
that.
learn, that's how each of us learns what we do well. Because so much of writing, the stuff we do well is just, we don't even think about it. It's just the way the words come out. And then there's the other part that we had to learn, but then we know what we're doing, Right. But the natural things, we're so ignorant of our own natural talents some of the time. And so we praise a lot. We share neutral observations. And the start of the talk is always, I say, who believes me that neutral observations are valuable? And always there are like very few hands, if any. And I say, yeah, I know, but trust me. And that's because, as you said, that when you're the writer, you go into it, all of this stuff. And it's really hard to read your own work with an empty mind. I mean, we can try by putting it away for a few weeks. We can try by just kind of, taking a deep breath and saying, I am a reader. I don't know.
I'm a reader. Yeah.
But we never get there completely. And so just to have somebody say what they perceived happened in the scene, or what they perceive the motivations of characters to be, or how they responded emotionally. Say, I laughed at this point here. That's where I laughed. or this point here, that's where I was surprised. Because those are things the writer can't know themselves. They can hope that somebody will be surprised.
Right. I wrote that so that they would laugh, but are they really laughing?
And sometimes you get really surprised because you think, I wrote that to be moving.
Right. Why are they laughing?
One of my favorite things is when you bring a piece to somebody and you were hoping they would read it one way and they read it a different way. Like you were hoping it was a scene showing a great relationship between two people, and they read it and they say, I don't trust this guy at all. And then you start to think maybe, oh, that's interesting. What if he's not trustworthy? What if,
right.
You can play with that, or you can go back and say, no, I need this to be a good relationship. I'm gonna fix that. So those are those two things. Mm-hmm. And only then do we get to criticism. And there are two important points for criticism for me. Am I saying too much, Terry?
No. This is fabulous, because I think there are a lot of authors out there who are asked, I know I am, who are asked, would you read part of my manuscript? Can we trade? Can we, let's talk about it. And the idea of how do you help? Like if someone has given me something to read, and it could use help, I would love to do that, but I don't want to do it in a way where I put them to bed for 12 hours. So,
exactly. So the two things that to me are the most important. One is that when you suggest something to improve or change or cut, it's not about fixing something that's bad, which is often the mindset the author feels. And again, that's natural. I feel that. That's normal. Yeah. I always articulate, especially when I'm leading a workshop group, what can we suggest that will make this already terrific piece even better?
Right.
Because we're not between two extremes, where here's perfect and here's awful. Most of us are in the middle somewhere, and we're just trying to move closer to the really, really good. Or wait, I just hear closer to the really, really good. There we go. That was my good man. But it's not about you failed or it was terrible. It's just about, no, it's really good, and
here is something that you might want to consider. I think that's the other thing is if it can be put in a way of, here's something to consider.
Yes.
As opposed to, you need to.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Because when I have an author or anyone actually tell me I need to do something, even when it's not about my writing. Even when it's not about my writing, it's like, I need to do what? What? Who are you to tell me? And so, having here's some suggestions to consider does go down better.
And why? And saying this is why I'm saying this, but always emphasizing the book belongs to them.
Right. And I do like that idea with always remembering that the author is the author, and in the end, the piece is theirs, and they're going to have to be comfortable with whatever goes out. And
completely.
That's one of the things that when people ask me, well, what would you tell a writer? I say, always listen to people who have suggestions and ignore those that don't fit you.
And this is the other important thing with criticism, okay?
Okay, let's hear it.
Some people, they jump ahead to how a problem should be fixed. And they tell the author, you should do this because that will fix X, Y, and Z. Or just they say you should do this. And often the author will instinctively know that that's not right. It's not right for the rest of the book they have planned. It's not right for the theme they're proposing. It's just not right for that character. And then they can just resist it and cross that off and say, I'm not going to listen to that. Fair enough. But far more important than suggesting how to fix a problem is just identifying that there is a problem.
Indeed, a problem. Right.
Much more useful, because for any problem in a book, there are at least 20 different ways an author can fix it.
Right.
And if you focus too much on this is the way to fix it, then then you can end up with this distance, and the author they know it's not right, so they're just going to dismiss it. But if you point out, hey, here's a problem. I was confused about who was speaking in this entire scene. Maybe there are too many characters, maybe, because that might be the solution to reduce the number of characters, right. Or maybe there are 19 other solutions or more that the author could take. So the focus on, when you're giving critique, I recommend to focus on identifying problems and only suggesting fixes as possibilities, if you suggest any at all. And for an author, if you're receiving commands, like from an editor or something, or even just from your workshop group or your friend, try to work back and figure out what problem they're trying to solve. You can ask them, or you can just think back, well, what would this change? What do I think they're trying to solve? Right. And then you can fix it your own way if you choose to. So that's the key.
Yeah. What's so interesting about that, in my second book, An Enemy Like Me, my editor came back to me and gave me a problem with a solution, and I hated her solution. I hated it, because what she said is this character William that you show as a grown up has no real arc. You just need to get rid of him.
That's your character.
It's like, what? Like, my whole book hangs on this character. Like, I've written it. Like, I was appalled, absolutely appalled. And so I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it. And I even wrote her a long letter as to why, and she then said, that's when she actually did the best thing she ever could do for me, is she said, so then what I want you to do is, because I wrote my book in such a way that William, as this adult, had his own chapters. She said, pull those chapters out and read them. You'll see he doesn't have an arc. She was right. But what she was wrong about was that he needed to stay. I needed to strengthen his arc, and it was all there. I just alluded to it. So anytime I alluded to it, I highlighted it and created way more content to actually show this growth, to show the problem.
So her solution was to cut it, and your solution was, no, this can be fixed. There's an arc. I'll find it for you.
I'll find it for you. And when I gave it back to her, she went, oh yes, this will work.
Oh,
and so
best feeling.
So it was that idea of, she gave this suggestion, and it was, it was like pulling my heart out, because I thought, well, if we do that, I'm just going to throw the book away. It's not even worth fixing, So I do like that idea of letting me know, like, from the beginning, it could have been said more like, there's no arc. Here's a way to look at the arc. There are several ways to fix it. One that's really easy would be just to eliminate him as an adult. And then I could have said, well, that's not going to happen. But then I would have been already thinking about others. Instead, I like tormented myself for weeks. And I kept thinking, maybe I just need a different editor. She just doesn't understand my story. Like, I was just horrified, because to me, the story hung with this character.
Right.
And I couldn't even, and then she was so right, though. It hung with the character, and the character and I were one, but I had not let my readers know. And so you're right. If I had been able to say, okay, what is she really saying? How else can I fix it? I probably would have saved myself 2 weeks of grief, but it's okay. I've learned things. So
we're all learning all the time.
Yes. One of the things that you said when you were kind of giving your opening was, to let writers know, what they can do, that they're allowed to do or allowed to say. And you have a chapter in there called May I? So explain your May I chapter. Like, what is that advice about?
The number one most popular question I would get asked by students is, am I allowed?
Am I allowed?
And then they finish that.
Right.
And it's always something like, am I allowed to have more than one narrator? Yes, of course you are. There are lots of books that have that. But even if there weren't, you're allowed to try. And the point of that chapter is, first of all, the answer is almost always yes. Do you remember the one thing that I said is not yes?
I can't remember. I remember reading it and laughing. What was it?
The one thing that is not yes is, may I type my medieval set story in calligraphy font?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I remember. That's why I laughed. No,
I do have
no,
to
you
be able
cannot.
to, read this clear. But other than that, my answer is always going to be yes, that you're allowed to do it. But then your next question is going to be, does it work?
Right.
And I don't know. Is that the best way you can tell your story? I don't know. Does it work? Is it clear? Does it accomplish what you were hoping it would accomplish? I don't know. Try it. Let's find out. But you're always allowed to jump in and try.
And try it. Yeah, I loved that advice, because especially I'm getting less that way now. But in the beginning, when you don't yet feel like an author and you're sure that there's a right way and only one right way, and that, everybody who does it differently than you is doing it right, and I'm the one over here doing it wrong, and all of those feelings, you do have that am I allowed to? Is it okay if I, and like you said, the answer is sure. Give it a shot. What's the worst that can happen? You don't like it and you decide to write it a different way or to put the story away for now.
Absolutely.
Because not everything that you start has to be finished. And not everything you start has to be published. I mean, sometimes the writing is just, I've got lots of partially finished manuscripts that I get to a point, it's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. I've kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of like done with it, and I put it away for a while, and maybe later I'll bring it back out. But what I learned in that beginning part was, maybe I learned some things about dialogue, or maybe I learned some things,
Exactly. And you also, just the practice of saying what you mean and meaning what you say, it's just so enriching as a human being. And that applies to fiction as much as it does for saying something in your own voice, because even with fiction, you're expressing how you see relationships and people and why people do things. And
so many people have asked me, like, well, how much of you or your experiences are in your book? Like most of them, to some degree. Like, no, I've never been a World War II soldier, but I have experienced fear and loss and anger, patriotism, all of those things. I've felt those things to some degree or another, and I'm leaning into those, and then saying things to myself like, okay, I've experienced being hungry before. What would it like to be really hungry? Like,
you
like
take it
5 days hungry. Like if I feel this way because I missed lunch, what would I feel like if I missed lunch and dinner? What if I missed 3 lunches and 3 dinners? Mm-hmm. And then you kind of go, okay, well, I know I can then extrapolate some things. So it's it's like how much it's me. That's what it is. I'm all of these characters and I'm none of these characters. It's I don't know how people would write without pulling on what they understand about life.
Right. Well, I think, and when you get to that point where you are pulling on your own observations about life, because I think there is a phase at the very beginning when you start to write the characters you think you're supposed to write. Yeah. And they act the way you think they're supposed to other people want them to act.
Right.
And it's such just a wonderful leap when you say, actually, wait, I observed this about the world around me, and I'm going to put that in my
I'm going to put that in there because for me, it was real.
Yeah.
And maybe it will be for someone else, or maybe it will allow someone else to see things just slightly differently than they would have otherwise. Yeah. Exactly. I love that. I love that. All right. Research. So I am a research junkie. I use the hashtag. In fact, I tell people all the time that one of the reasons I really love doing historical fiction is because I get to do 2 things I love, which is research and write. I mean, it's like, but you talk about how there's too much and there's too little, right? So let's talk a little bit about like how much is enough.
Oh, so yeah, okay. So first of all, people usually can accurately say about yourselves, are you the person who researches a lot, or are you the person who jumps in without researching?
Yeah.
And if you're the person who researches a lot, you got to put a cap on that. Because then you'll never write anything. And in fact, sometimes when I've gone down these research rabbit holes, and then I go to write the scene, and I only use like 2 elements. And I'm like, oh, okay, I did not need to spend.
Oh, that was a lot of time, yeah.
But then again, I mean, sometimes you do, in a sense, to learn what you don't know.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
And then so that you can actually pick out the 2 elements that are going to be the most valuable for your scene. If you hadn't done enough research, you might not have ever found those 2 elements.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, like you said, you do so much research that you never write the scene, because there's always more.
Yep. There's
always more.
But then if you're the other way, if you just like, oh, I'll just dive in and I'll fix it later, I say, whoa, because some things can't be fixed later.
Right.
Some things your plot depends on. What if your whole plot depends on a technology that wasn't invented during World War I? Exactly. And then you're like, oh no.
Exactly. So I'm both a before and during researcher.
Totally. That sounds perfect.
So I do a moderate amount of research beforehand and kind of immerse myself in the era and kind of just and I'm not even looking for anything specific. I'm just trying to, like, if I were living in this era, what would I be feeling? What would I be seeing? What would I be wearing? I just kind of do that. And then I start writing my scene and I think, oh, I want him to be going on a date. I remember Brill Cream. Was Brill Cream around in 1939? And I look it up and it's like, oh, look, yes, it would have been. It came out in the early 30s, and by the mid 30s, it was very popular. Fantastic. Brill Cream. Because I would hate to put Brill Cream in his hair in 39 and find out it didn't come out to 45.
Yes.
And
but
I don't know.
That's fixable.
Yes, that's fixable.
Unless it's like the murder weapon or something.
Right,
in which case.
But it's those kinds of things. And I recognize that I would say most of my readers aren't going to ever notice or care something that small.
Oh, but
it matters to me.
Readers, they know.
They know, yeah. And then, I always tell people that, like, with historical fiction, and really with anything that has information that is real life that you're having to put into your book in some way, that I do my very best, but that I am not a historian. And this is a work of fiction, and that I did my best to represent the time period and my best to represent what was happening. But you have to stop researching at some point.
Yeah. Or there's no story. You'll just never get to it.
You'll be dive bombing down all those rabbit holes forever. So I love that idea.
It helps so much if you know anybody who is an expert. And this isn't just with historical. This is like if you're writing a courtroom scene.
Anything,
and you know someone who's a lawyer or a judge or works in a court or has served on a jury. And you can just slip them a scene and say, am I on the right track with this?
Is there anything here that just stands out as wrong?
I once contacted a lock keeper out in the fens here. I live in England.
Yeah.
And to ask him, so if I were to dump a body at this point, would it be fair to say it might emerge at this other point? And he was like, sure, that actually sounds right to me. And,
and you're like, good, now I'm not actually dumping a body. I just want to be, I want to be completely
writing a book.
I've always said that if the FBI ever took a look at my internet history, they might be a little concerned with me. But anyway,
it's interesting what you brought up about the research and what my advice was in that chapter, because I think you pounced on something that I tried to do throughout the whole book, is that I can't tell you what you need to do to get better without knowing where you are right now.
Right.
So this book isn't a list of instructions telling you do this, this, and this. It's a whole lot of principles to think about. And to be fair, some of them are very specific skill-based principles,
right,
that I think are extremely useful. But it's all about the person reading it having to figure out where they are in relation to this, and which parts need to take them in what direction.
Exactly.
And you know, I personally get frustrated when books say this is the structure of a novel, and they tell you this, and this.
Yeah.
And, you know, I always say, if that helps you, if that inspires you, if that excites you and makes you feel secure, 100% use it. But it's something that just, I hate it, because I was brought up by, you know, this painting behind me was painted by my mom in the 60s, and my dad was in love with James Joyce. And, you know, he was all about rule breakers and doing crazy things, and always challenging me, like, why are you using quotation marks?
Right.
What if you just didn't use any? That'd be
what if
cool,
you did this instead? Yeah.
And so I just love the idea of an artist or a writer, you know, figuring out their own way and figuring out what they want to say. And I'm not saying that structures are not useful. Again, if they're useful to you, if they help you, if they inspire you, use them. But I think we get structures a lot.
Yes.
And so a lot of the point of this book was kind of responding to what I feel is missing a lot. So I know that self-discipline is important, but our culture is overly intense about self-discipline. Everybody knows they should be more disciplined. They should work harder. We all know that.
Yeah.
So I write about daydreaming, not because I think daydreaming is more important than self-discipline. I think,
but because we never hear about it.
Yeah, but we need to hear about daydreaming. Yeah. So much of what I put into this book is trying to balance the things that I see kind of overwhelming the world of writing and
instruction. I loved the daydreaming thing. And I think partially because there's still that little voice in my head that says that I don't do things right. And I do not write every day.
Yep, me neither.
I can't. I've tried it. I have tried it. I tried it for 6 long weeks of get up every morning and write for 3 hours. And I threw away just about everything I wrote because it was terrible. And it felt forced. And I got to the point that
it was forced. It was literally forced.
And I hated writing. And I loved to write. And I hated I would get up in the morning and think, oh, I gotta go write. And it's like, that is so not what this is about. Yes. But even though I had that experience, and I knew that for me, I tell people that I'm a binge writer. And I will sit down sometimes for 2 weeks and write 8 or 10 hours a day for 2 weeks and not touch it again for a month and a half, because that's how I write. And it wasn't until I read your book about daydreaming that I thought, I am writing. I'm writing even when I'm not writing, because I think about things and I'm trying out scenes in my head, not even always aware that I'm doing it. Like all of a sudden I'll think, oh, I have been thinking about that character. And that might be the thing.
Yep.
Huh. Isn't that,
And then you get excited again, and then you write out of that excitement.
And I write until it's like, okay, I'm out of ideas again. And then I get up and I even had the same problem. I was working as I wrote for small businesses, and sometimes they would have me write like ebooks and things. Okay. And I would never do a by the hour. I always wanted to do it by the project.
I'm so with you on that.
I didn't know how to charge them.
I thought about it in the shower. What is that?
Yes. Like I'm in here doing dishes. Do I charge you half time because I wasn't actually at the computer? Like, I don't know what to do, because when I sit down to write, I'm extremely efficient because I've been thinking about it for the last 10 hours. So I either cheat myself because very efficiently I wrote 10 hours worth of work in an hour and a half, or you feel cheated because I actually charged you for doing dishes. So,
Yep.
but I loved that because for the first time it gave me kind of a, oh, I am actually doing it. I do
Well,
write
that's
every
thrilled
day.
me here.
So that was fantastic for me. The other thing that I read that was interesting, because I had never separated the two terms, was the difference between structure and plot.
Oh, yes. That's
I had
so,
always
so,
just,
so
I
important.
had just kind of, I don't know, I'd kind of lumped them
Everybody
as one
does.
thing. So because of that, let's talk about that. What is structure? What is plot? Why are they different? How are they connected?
Right. So plot are the things that happen, right? And as a novelist, let's say you're a novelist who's already decided your plot. Or what if you're writing a memoir or a biography or something true and the plot is already decided for you? So let's just pretend that the plot is fixed. In real life with fiction, plot is not fixed and you can change as you go.
Right.
Let's just say, even if your plot is fixed, it is a mistake to think, therefore, I now have the structure of my book. Because where are you going to start? There are at least 20 different places in that plot that you could start. Where are you going to end? When are you going to consider the book finished, the story done? What has to happen to make that finale moment? It could be here, it could be here, it could be here. And then, who is going to tell which part and in what order? So, you can have, is that going to be something they remember in the middle of the book when they're already in the middle of the criminal trial?
Right.
And then we're going to get it as a flashback or a memory or in their testimony? Or is that going to be something you're going to show us in chronological order, maybe as a prologue or in the first chapter because it happened then? So don't be a prisoner of chronology. There are so many different ways story elements can come in to a story, and you have so much choice, so much power, so many options, even if your plot is fixed. And in fiction, that's not fixed.
Right.
But even if the amount of power and options you have is huge. And I think a lot of people, it takes working up to it to realize how much power and how much options you have. It's just very natural to feel like you don't have that.
Right. And I think a lot of people really do have that, there's just the one way to write a book.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, you're almost told that different, like you said, different books come out and say, this is the way to write the book. This is the way. And then you go read. And I'm an avid reader. And it's like, well, there's more than one way to write a book. Look, she did it this way and he did it this way.
Yes.
And, and so I think that I liked that idea, that distinction, that even if you know the plot, even if you know, I plan to do this and this and this, and this is the person that's going to have done it in the end. And I kind of have my little things set out, that how you show it to your reader is the structure.
Yes. It's the reader's journey.
Yes.
Which is not necessarily the same as the protagonist. It can be. Some people do write books that are strictly chronological, and those can be great books.
Exactly.
And where the reader is sharing the protagonist experience, and they're thinking the same things, they're suspecting the same things. But then there are other books where the reader's journey is very different from the protagonist's journey, or there may be multiple protagonists, or who knows. But yeah, I sometimes even have to have a separate outline for my reader's experience versus my character's experiences.
Yeah. So I think what I loved about that your book is that it got me to thinking, and it gave me options for considering how I might go about doing something, instead of being very rigid and making me feel like, oh, I've been doing it wrong. This was more this was more of a, hey, there's a lot of ways to do things. Here are the things to consider while you're out there doing your craft.
Exactly. I want people to walk away from reading this feeling empowered. And it's not just about, saying like, oh, you can do anything. Because while that's very nice, it's not,
right.
There are just really specific chapters about, here are some things that work well. This is why they work well. These are the methods they used. You can choose from these methods to have the effect that you want.
Right.
And you can just look up how to, setting and description and metaphors and similes and something that's made me so happy when I've been reading the reviews that people have been leaving, and it's just one of the great joys in life is to feel understood.
Right.
And I feel like I was able to communicate what I intended. And one of those things, and people often doubt that this can possibly be true. But I teach a lot of different courses, and some courses have beginners in them, and some courses have very experienced writers in them. And people ask me, how I change the lectures on certain topics for different levels.
Right.
And I say, well, actually, I don't. The principles of good writing are the same for everybody. And the more experienced you are, the more you'll be able to absorb, the more sophisticated a manner you'll be able to express what you're learning here. But it doesn't change. And I just love that the reviewers have been pointing out that they said, this is for everybody. This is for absolute beginners. This is for people with MFAs and published books. This is there's something to think about here for everybody. And that just filled me with joy, because that was my hope. Right. And that was my opinion about the things I teach. And I am thrilled that people from all those different levels were saying that.
Right. I'm currently working on my 4th manuscript that will complete. And you'd think, okay, yeah, I'm at a point I shouldn't need these, but no, I learned things. And if nothing else, it just made me feel good about my process.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I'm taking a deep breath and saying, okay, I am not the only person out here who doesn't write every morning. I think that the part that I have the most problem with are the people who do have a very specific process, often feel like it is the right way.
Oh, yeah.
And then point that as why you're not doing it.
Yeah, right. That's not just writers. That's about
I think that's true. That is true. My way or the highway. My way or the highway. And I'm, it's hard when you see an author who's well-known, who obviously is doing well, who's one of the authors that have made it big, who comes out point blank and says, if you're not writing every day, you're doing it wrong. And you think, I'm never, then I'm never going to make it. And it's like, no, that's not true. It's not true. It may be true for him.
Yep.
For him, that is the best, because for whatever reason, this works for him. But
sharing what works
for you is great.
But projecting it onto others as a requirement,
never works. Right. So the last thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is like groups, courses, books, finding that community, that village. When I first started writing fiction, I was in an abusive relationship and did not reach out to anyone.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So now I got out of the relationship and I'm still writing, but I'm not reaching out to anyone because I'm still not in a safe place in my own mind. I don't believe I'm an actual writer. I don't believe that I'm ever going to be good enough. I don't, all the things that happen.
Yeah.
When you
feel,
right. Right. And so, it took time, but I actually published my first book without having a mentor, without being in a group, without having taken a course, without having beta readers, none of it. I kind of did it all because I had to succeed me. Right. So people ask me things like, well, who's your mentor? And it's like, oh, I feel really bad. I don't even, but I really now I've reached out and I've found my people, and we can talk. I think it would have been a easier journey for me had I reached out early. So let's talk about things like groups, courses, books, getting a degree, what's necessary, what's not? How do you find the groove that works for you?
Right. I mean, I love that you brought this up, because yes, the typing, the time when I'm actually doing the writing, that I do need to be alone. You know,
Right.
that has to be solitary. Even if my husband promises to be very, very quiet, it's like, no, you have to be in another room. So, you know, and so there's the stereotype that is mostly correct about writing being solitary. And I am just discovering more and more as I work with students the importance of the social aspect of writing. And there are a couple of groups I lead where I don't really do much teaching. I don't do much workshopping, as in like looking at something they've spent time on and then critiquing it for them. But it's just exercises, and it's just positive responses where we just talk about what we admired and what worked for us in the piece. And it's just, I just see people blooming in their confidence. And it takes confidence to write something, and you can't just get there with self-affirmations in a vacuum. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
It comes from when you write a scene that you meant to be funny and you hear people laugh as you're reading it out, or you hear them gasp in the right place or whatever. Yes. And it's just, it builds confidence from experience, which is so much less fragile than like self-imposed confidence. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
And
yes.
So yeah, there's so much worth, and it doesn't have to be a group. Sometimes it's just from you trade work with a friend. And one of the things that I just think is so interesting is that a lot of people think that getting feedback, getting advice is something that only amateurs do until you're a professional, and then you don't need it anymore. Whoa. And, you know, one of my dear friends, she's a mega best-selling author, and I'll tell you how we met. We were having a cup of coffee after she'd just moved to town, you know, and she had asked me to do something as part of a festival she was putting together. And so we were just hanging out. And after an hour, she said, "Look, I'm new here. Will you be my writing partner?" And this is a multi-best-selling author. And she said, "I just want someone to go back and forth over it with before I send it to my editor, because then the publication process, you know, it goes fast."
Right.
And so that's something that we all continue to gain from this sharing. So first of all, I think sharing is incredible. What kind of sharing or atmosphere is going to work for you? Is it going to be a one-on-one like I have with this friend? Is it going to be a workshop group? You do have to be careful. You have to find a group that shares your values and shares your taste, and
right.
that supports your genre. They don't necessarily have to be knowledgeable about it, but they can't be denigrating it. You know, you don't want to get feedback on a romance novel from somebody who looks down on romance novels. That's not cool.
It's not going to work. Nor do you want to get yourself into a group where you find that you're reading things that you find offensive. You know, I'm not comfortable reading erotica. I'm just not. Okay. Right. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying I personally am very uncomfortable. Well, given that, I certainly wouldn't want to be in a group where one of the authors, that's what they're producing, and that I'm supposed to be reading it, because I don't want to read it. And I'm not going to have anything great to say because, well, I'm not going to say anything out loud at all, because I'm going to have been embarrassed that I even read it, and now I have to look at them. And I know, and I know it's me.
And you know your limit.
Yeah, I know it's me. And so you do, like you said, you have to kind of know, like, what are you getting yourself into?
And that erotica writer deserves better.
Exactly.
As well.
Exactly. It's not just about me. It's more about them. I can't give them what they need. I can't.
So it's got to be a group where everybody is agreeing. I'm going to help you do what you want to do, not tell you you should be doing something else, because that's not cool. Everybody gets to decide their own goal.
Right. Right.
And that goal needs to be supported. So you have to find a place for that. About whether or not you should take a course. I mean, obviously, I think there's some good in courses because I teach them.
Right. If you didn't, you'd be out of a job. So, yeah.
I mean, for a lot of people, it gives them a structure. It gives them feedback. It sets a high standard. And it's in a way, it can give them permission. Like if you're just writing as a hobby, then you can kind of feel guilty that you're not washing the dishes or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
but if you say, I have to do my homework.
That's a whole different thing, right?
Yeah. More, right. So it can be useful. But something that I have, a conclusion that I have come to about life, just seeing a lot of students at different stages. I think doing like an MFA or equivalent degree or an MST like I teach, can be a great thing for somebody, in their 30s and their 40s, or older, that sort of thing, where you're making the decision, you're saying, I'm ready. I know I need some help, but I'm ready to dive in. And that can be great. I get a little concerned about like 18-year-olds doing a creative writing degree. Now, first of all, if that's your dream, do it. 100%. I am never here to take away your dream. My answer is always follow your nose.
Right.
But the caution I have for like an 18, 19, 20-year-old is that you can be an incredibly talented writer, but not have found your voice yet, or not have found kind of what you want to write about yet. And it can be really demoralizing to have to be writing on command week after week and then getting feedback on it, and worse, getting grades on it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So
when you're
you at a vulnerable time as a creative person.
Before you have kind of like settled on, this is what I'm trying to achieve with my writing, or this is what,
So it can be a great thing to study creative writing as an undergraduate, as a teenager. And if somebody's having a great experience or has that strong desire, 100% they should do it. But my caution is maybe you'd be better off studying something that you might later want to write about. Like for me, that would be, archaeology, astronomy. Or sounding like a parent, maybe something that will help you have an interesting, lucrative day job to support you to be able to write what you want to write. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? There are lots of different ways to consider the best way to educate yourself. But there are so many opportunities. I mean, there are books, there are online groups. I learned from the online group Absolute Right. I don't even know if it's still going, but hey, if anybody from Absolute Right is out there, hello, I'm Emily Winslow from there. And I just, there are so many different ways to learn with other people, but I really, really believe that reaching out and sharing your work in whatever degree you're comfortable, is just such a key part of the whole process of becoming more and more yourself.
Well, and for me, I have found that it has made writing a more joyful experience to have my people, to know that I can send something to a friend and say, hey, what do you think of this? And get their honest feedback and just be part of other people who are writing, and to know that they too reach out and say, hey, I had this idea. What do you think? Does that have any merit? Do you see it going anywhere? And, being able to go back and forth. And so, if I could go back and change things, of course, I would have never been in that relationship. But if that were not possible, I still think I would have found a way to reach out. I felt too vulnerable, and I could not feel vulnerable. And so I could not do it. And I loved it. It's one of the reasons why I decided to do a podcast, was the interaction that I have now with other authors. It enthuses me, and it charges me up.
And that way you can feel understood earlier in the process. I think it's so dangerous if everything is completely secret the whole way, and you're hinging all your hopes on publication and being understood by reviewers and being understood by the readers you're hoping will buy your book. And that can be a long wait. That can be a long way to go. You can be understood during the journey.
Right. Right. And I love that. I love that.
Can I tell you my dream?
Oh, let's hear the dream. Yes,
my
absolutely.
dream with this book is I hope that people will that sometimes like writing groups or book groups will get together and want to like discuss a chapter or a cluster of chapters every week and use this as a sort of skeleton for getting together.
Yeah,
that would make me so happy.
Okay,
I hope that would make them happy.
So let's put it out there. Okay, so like that would actually be a great idea for a group. So if you are an author that's in a group and you're kind of struggling with what should we be doing or how can we make this more effective for our authors, you can continue doing your critiques as you've been doing, but why not talk about a particular chapter or a particular section? Why not bring that to the forefront and have a little discussion just to get ideas flowing? I love that.
And anybody listening, if your group does that, get in touch. You can find my email on my website, and I'd be willing to come in on a Zoom and say, hey, if that would be of interest to your group. So
fantastic. So that was my final and last question, which is how can people reach out to you? So what is your website, Emily?
Well, handily enough, it is emilywinslow.com.
How perfect is that? And I'll have that in the show notes. And then are you on social media? Is there a way people can follow you there?
Yeah, I'm like many writers. I am my introverted self does not post too much on social media, but I am on Facebook, Emily Winslow .author, I think. But anyway, Emily Winslow, you'll find me there, and Emily C. Winslow on Instagram. Okay. And there will be often cat pictures. Those are my little ladies next to me. Wait, where's the other one? There it is.
There we go.
So I'm a cat picture person on those things. And I also post beautiful pictures of Cambridge because it's just such a beautiful city.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate you being on this show with me. Thank you so much. I think we've learned a lot. So this was great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.